and welcome to Africa Goes H+. We are Transhumanist Africa, a network of African transhumanists on the African continent and in the African diaspora. This is our show titled Africa Goes H+, where we intend to discuss everything transhumanism and Africa. Going forward, we also hope to produce this podcast show on a more regular basis. I am Chogwu Abdul, an African transhumanist from Nigeria, and joining me today are two of our members from North America and East Africa, respectively. First off, we have Marlin Adam, who is the producer of the series, the science fiction social fiction series, The Next Iteration, which he describes as a tale of Black redemption. Welcome, Mr. Marlin.
Good day.
And then we have Hruy Tsgeay joining us from Ethiopia and representing East Africa. Mr. Tsegaye is a co-founder of iCog Labs, which is the first private artificial intelligence research and development company in Africa that was founded in 2010. Mr. Tsegaye, pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here, Chogwu.
All right. Okay, so we'll start with you, Marlin, about transhumanism. This thing called transhumanism, what is your own take about it?
Yes, how you doing, fellas? This is thanks for the opportunity to come together and to bring us all into one space. I think it's pretty significant to have us, the diaspora, sort of opining about this really transformative technological human developments that is, as I say, happening right now. But I want to start with kind of recentering the definition of Afrofuturism, only because that's the term that people tend to use when they're talking about the future, and I even hesitate to talk about the future because I haven't really discerned a plausible projection of a future that any of us really want to see. But be that as it may, the term does have currency socially. So I want to focus on sort of recentering that definition and to focus on the enhancement of our competitiveness, right? And then I will kind of, as a way of kind of bringing people into what the mainstream transhumanists kind of how they define themselves. I'll talk about the three key vectors of practical transhumanism, and then I'll segue into the next iteration, which is my audiovisual series about a Black transhumanist that saves the world. Which in fact, quite frankly, is a philosophical turning point for Black folks, particularly. You know, the idea that we would be at the center of the future of of mankind runs counter to our focus on ending racism or ending classism and so on and so forth. So let me start with the term transhumanism, as it was once first coined by Julian Huxley, brother of Aldous Huxley, in the article New Bottles for New Wine, written back in 1957. But this definition was tied to his thoughts on social, political, and economic transformation. And that definition was expanded by the futurist New School for Social Research professor, Ferdinand Esfandiari, who later changed his name, thank goodness, to FM 2030, and who considered transhumanism to simply be about transcending our biological limitations, right? Namely mortality, which comports closer to the definition of transhumanism that I learned from the book Radical Evolution, The Promise and Peril of Enhancing Our Mind and Body, written by Joel Grue back in 2005. Transhumanists believe that we can and should use technology to overcome the limitations of the brain and body. For example, transhumanists advocate using technology to radically increase our lifespan, intelligence, happiness, and virtue. They also advocate for human enhancement along three particular vectors, as they describe them. One vector is the cognitive enhancement vector that uses pharmaceuticals, genetic therapies, and tissue engineering. Direct modification of the organic brain will allow human beings to increase our intelligence, expand our memory, sharpen our capacity for concentration, and eliminate cognitive and psychological disabilities. A second vector is through the cyborgization, the incorporation of devices like nanobots and computers into the body. Now, this trajectory may permit the augmentation of the senses with artificial hearing, sight superior to organic ears and eyes, the direct augmentation of cognition with brain prostheses, and connecting the brain wirelessly to the internet. These technologies will likely converge with the growth of the meta, or what they call the metaverse, the virtual world and augmented reality, blurring the divisions between what is virtual and what is real. Now that sounds crazy, but as you all probably remember, Facebook renamed itself Meta, partly as in anticipation of what I always like to use, the next iteration of our existence as human beings. And this is being envisioned and talked about as a sort of hybrid world, right? But so that brings me really to the state of transhumanism in America. When you listen to the definitions there, and they talk about the fundamental transformation of the human existence, how is that going to manifest itself? Well, in America, we have a highly advanced genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nano processes research and development and product development industry. All right. We're also doing a lot of research that is starting to manifest itself on the communicating with the body's electrochemical matrix. And this is operable at different levels. Think about Elon Musk's Neuralink project. That's just one example. So what should African transhumanists look like? Well, the way I've conceived of it, it's been through this project that I've been working on for a number of years now. It's called The Next Iteration. I'm a producer in the film and television business. And I think about the world a lot through those mediums, because the medium is as ancient as we are human. It's a way of reflecting about who we are, what we can become. And this whole transhumanist reality has manifested itself for me in how we as Africans can benefit in this series, The Next Iteration. I want to read you a quick log line from the series. They're madly in love and want to make the world a better place with their human enhancement discoveries, but their government and corporate competitors would rather see David and Maggie Clark dead. A lot of drama there, but this is what we do in the business of audio-visual entertainment. But in that log line, it's jam-packed with the excitement of how this new transformative existence is going to play itself out. They're madly in love and want to make a world a better place. It's about a couple of people who are working in some very sophisticated agencies. Here in the United States, they call it the Defense Agency Research Project, DARPA. And they're doing all of the high-level what-if type research. And here you have two African-American researchers who have been ensconced in a very privileged world, who for whatever reason have decided that they need to make a broader contribution, particularly in the context of an advancing humanity that's going to exacerbate and make really unbridgeable the gap between the have and have nots. They've decided to come out and make that knowledge available. And when you think about that, you start to think about the series, or not the series, but the movie called Hidden Figures. It was produced in the United States a couple of years back. And that story that film told the story of these exceptionally smart mathematicians who were Black and who were part of the first NASA research and development trip to the moon. People who, for all intent and purposes, developed out of nowhere, because NASA started their researching back in the 50s, and America was still a very segregated society. Nobody knew, Black people even knew how to do math. Hadn't been long since it was illegal to read and write. So these people came out of nowhere, but it highlighted the fact that we were there, we were getting this knowledge, and there were people who had knowledge parity with the state of the art in terms of math and science. And so that concept of us being even simultaneously highly advanced, but highly unorganized as a society, as our individual societies on the continent of Africa, on our individual communities existing in the diaspora, it turns it on its head conceptually, if you allow it to. Right. So the next iteration is about these hidden figures actually bringing us into the future. Right. And this is what we call a plausible projection, because just like these hidden figures were real back in the 50s, they're real today. And there's the concept of the next iteration is really our opportunity to project to the broader audience out there, the Africans on the continent, the Africans in the diaspora, of what the reality, the science facts are about our human existence and what we know about it, and adding a little social fiction to expand our understanding of what we can get accomplished by focusing on human development. So that's my understanding of what the transhumanist movement is about. And it's my own personal conception of how transhumanism can inform our own march from humiliation to redemption. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, Marlin, for that very deep and insightful description of transhumanism and its possible applications to the condition of African humanity. And just to say it straight once again, because I didn't get it out clearly the first time, the next iteration produced by Marlin, it's a science fiction, social fiction series that aims to present a plausible projection of a proactive Black future. I look forward to having Marlin tell us more about the next iteration as this show unfolds. But now let's turn to Mr. Tsegaye, who is our representative in East Africa, to tell us his own take about transhumanism. Mr. Tsegaye, what in your view is transhumanism?
Okay, so I would like to say first that kudos to everyone in this platform for making this thing happen, for making this thing real, because I know we have been going through some hassles to make this real. So I think it's a good start, and thank you, everyone. And then I will go to your question. For me, obviously transhumanism, it's broad and it's controversial. I would even like to start with a controversy. I mean, you remember back in 2004, it was labeled as the greatest threat to the welfare of humanity. I think it was Francis Fukuyama who labeled it as such.
Dangerous idea.
Yes, the most dangerous idea. And he also emphasized that the movement wants nothing less than to liberate the human race, we humans, from our biological constraints. The good thing is, even within this controversial term, you can see some bits of transhumanist philosophies. But broadly speaking, for me, transhumanism is it's a philosophy and as well application of science, which seeks the continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life. In our case, humans. Well, I don't remember when I write this, but I think we humans were not fully intelligent. It's a funny thing, but yeah, it's a continuation of intelligent life form, and it emphasizes science and technology, and it aims to enhance our condition. In addition to the science aspects and the technology application, I also believe that transhumanism argues that we should apply reasoning, at least rational reasoning, and we should make technologies widely available for the rest of humanities. So these are the points I take from transhumanism, or I want these points to be integrated in the African transhumanist point of view. It's a movement that wants to accelerate the continuation of the human evolution. It's also a movement that wants to apply rational reasoning. It's also a movement that aims to make technology widely available. These are my points, and these are the way I define transhumanism, and this should be the definition of an African transhumanism. And then why do we need it? I mean, Africa, we have lots and lots of problems. At the same time, we have lots and lots of African philosophy. So do we need this transhumanism in Africa? Even I have been discussing with colleagues, university students, and members of society in Addis Ababa, and most of them, they ask me that, is it another crazy old white dream? The white man, is it a dream of immortality or something like that? So the definition can be broad, but one thing I agree is that we need it in Africa, because the promise, it has a potential to improve the human condition. It's very optimistic, and it can be applied in the existing African conditions, so we can use it as a problem-solving tool. It could actually, help in solving the crisis in Africa. In addition to the resource problem, Africa. One best example could be, as Martin shared in his definition of transhumanism, it has a medical aspect. We can use it to solve countless problems when it comes to diseases. We can apply it even in agriculture and lots of broad sectors in Africa. So your question, what is transhumanism for you, Hruy, is that it's a way to the future. It's a way to the future. Whether we accept it or whether we reject it, it doesn't matter. It's happening. It's happening elsewhere. And it's time for us, for Africans, to awaken and to grab this concept, to understand it. And then understanding it, after understanding it, we need to own it. We need to make it ours. We need to reshape it. Because, in the past, we have been in the backseat for good or for bad, and we have been observing, even they call us the Forsaken Continent or something like that. So with this thing, with this radically game-changing philosophy plus application, we Africans need to embrace it, needs to reshape it and mold it in accord to our needs. So for me, transhumanism is a tool. It's a tool. I simply understood it as a tool. There could be different schools, there could be different sects, and I don't think we should have a consensus, or I don't think we should have this Catholic and universal definition of the term. But as Africans, we need to embrace it as a tool. This is what I would like to emphasize.
Oh, thank you so much, Tsegaye. And I would say you took much of the words out of my mouth when it comes to definition of transhumanism. I like it where you mentioned the application of reason. I like it where you mentioned the ethical use of science and technology. And I like it the most when you cited that part of the definition of transhumanism in the Transhumanists frequently asked questions, FAQs, where it emphasizes the making available and accessible technologies, making widely accessible and available technologies that will enhance the human condition. And this is where Africa comes in, because I keep saying it even in the previous symposium where I was one of the speakers, that for transhumanism to live up to its ideals, then that element of making its technologies widely distributed must be met. And that is where we as Africans, apart from just expecting technology transfer, we could also, from the initial models, start building up and indigenizing those technologies, the same samples, but from an indigenous perspective. But the long and short of it is those technologies, like you said, are tools, and tools could be applied in any context, within any culture, or could be contextualized within every life situation. So my own definition of transhumanism doesn't go far from what you've already said. It's a movement to enhance the human condition through ethical use of science and technologies, which should be made widely accessible and available. And there should also be the application of reason and rationality in the bringing of these technologies to enhance the human condition, and in this case, the African human condition. I also like it where you drove it home that for many Africans, it's more of a practical thing. When transhumanism is to be brought our way, we need not necessarily start with the fantastic ideations of transhumanism, but transhumanism as what will help us in some basic technological needs, from agriculture to transportation, to energy, to clean water, to healthcare. This should be the starting point where Africans should see the need to embrace transhumanism as that thing which brings about useful use of technology to improve our lives. So good enough, there is some hopeful signs of the growth of transhumanism in Africa and even among the African diaspora. And this brings me to the next point I want us to discuss. If you take a survey of transhumanism, either among Africans in the North American diaspora or Africans in East, West, and about Southern Africa, what can we say about that rising population? So I'll start with you again, Marlin. Among Blacks in America, you just mentioned the very important movie, The Hidden Figures. And this should make us see that Blacks are well into science, Blacks are into maths, Blacks are into engineering. And as such, we could expect some Blacks also to be into transhumanism. So what is the scenario? What's the situation there in the USA as regards transhumanism among Africans or African Americans?
Well, it's not a popular conversation It's not a popular conversation. There are some African Americans involved with some of the, on the scholarly side and on the scientific side, that are to this day still kind of hidden figures. So, and I've had, for instance, I've had the website Transhumanism in New York City up since at least 2012, and there's been very little interest, some interest in the field, but I can tell you also, these are all anecdotals, but from the lack of real interest in the transhumanism in New York City, which is, for anybody interested in transhumanism, that term in New York City would have attracted quite a bit. It's attracted quite a few folks who, in general, the general transhumanist community, but it's, when they look at the site, they clearly see it's not a general, transhumanist community site. It's a site focused on us. So while I get a lot of flybys with general community, I've had very little, very, very little stickiness, if you will, from African Americans, Black people in America interested in the topic. So that's one set of anecdotal data. Has a little more grounding in sort of factuals, but the other one is some time ago, as I mentioned, I'm a producer, so I'm always perpetually in the hunt for money. So when I was in a sort of in a more about 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say, and I was in a more intense look for search for cash, I had a lot of conversations with young Black creatives, Black angel investors, Black, just smart Black people in sciences as well, who were not familiar with transhumanism. They know about, they've heard about some of the top line stuff. They've heard the name Ray Kurzweil. They've heard, those kinds of things, but the concepts of transhumanism, and certainly no one had given any thought to what it could mean for us as a human development tool, right? And part of that reason is because, as I said earlier, our focus tends to be on sort of ending conditions, like the conditions of racism, conditions of classism, and what that does and does for, particularly here in America, it's had us focused on, sort of outwardly focused, right? Transhumanism is about being inwardly focused. How do we improve our human condition, right? What we're capable of. And that's a discussion that has yet to be openly had in a larger context outside of academia here in America, but certainly not in public context. But in the Black communities here, it's a conversation that has not been had at all. Afrofuturism, as I mentioned, does not deal with transhumanism. Afrofuturism has everything to do with just the way it's coming out now. It has everything to do with trying to de-otherizing yourself. It has nothing to do with the reality, the science, the scientific realities of biopatches and elongation of the telomere chromosome and all of the other, fundamental research projects that we know is going on, that we know about, and we hope to actually expose here on the podcast in future episodes, to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what is it that's going on, how are these technologies, who's behind them, and how are they being used, and what could be some of the implications for us, right? I think that's part of our responsibility to this podcast, is to get into that. It's not what we're doing as Africans, but it's what is happening in the field. And then we have to think about it as Africans, how, we address that.
Okay, so as part of solutions to this, like you portrayed it, not so impressive popularity of transhumanism among African Americans or blacks. Um, do we think the approach of bridging further the works of African transhumanists in the academia with the entertainment industry would be a good way to improve or increase popularity of transhumanism among blacks in the US? Because we do know that entertainment, it's one area where you have a lot of black participation.
Yeah, well, that is, I mean, when you it's difficult to separate blacks in America from the mainstream, really, when it comes down to it. You know what I mean? Black folks in America do not have a conception of themselves outside of the mainstream. Our whole existence is dependent on being part of that mainstream, right? Black folks don't have, we have no controls over any of the economic levers in America, none of them. When they talk about black billionaires, what they're talking about is what the elite financial class, what their interest is in these folks, how much connection we have to. So if Oprah is a billionaire, it's because she has contracts that are worth, that put her value at $1 billion, right? And those contracts represent our connection to the mainstream, to white America, the white ruling class, because America is a racial oligarchy, essentially, you know. So when they talk about the black wealth, they're talking about what is the value of your connection to us? Because without that connection, there's not very much there. You know, there might be some cash, but as you guys know, cash is fungible, and you know it loses value very quickly.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so we so my road to getting this, to producing this series, has been one, like as I said, mentioned earlier. You know, I've had discussion with creatives. I have in fact, one of the persons I had writing on the series in the beginning has actually got to Hollywood. She made it to Hollywood soon after working on this series. And, you know, she never really, you know, fully understood or could intuit, you know, what we were trying to do with this. You know, she understands transhumanism. Oh, and you know, she's into horror and sci-fi, you know, so she has that understanding of it. But from a philosophical standpoint, she's not there. From a human development standpoint, she's not there. From a black nationalist perspective, she's certainly not there, because that's not her world, right? So she has not given any thought to it as an empowerment tool for our future, right? Our future in the minds of, and you only use her as an example of when you talk about in Black American entertainment industry, our future is what they tell us our future is, right? What our future is tied, right, to white America. That's our future. There is no concept of Black future without a white America. No, you will find that nowhere in anything that comes out of Hollywood, anything that comes out of Black independents that live in America, out of nothing. The next iteration is the only thing that, as I call, a plausible projection of a future that we can have ourselves and
right.
set out on a path of our own. It's not even, when you say on your own, it's not even on your own, because the transhumanist community and the scientific community, you know, the discoveries and the interactions are all faceless. I mean, not faceless, but it's not about race in those contexts and those people, right? It is and it isn't. But because when you're in those worlds, you're really about the science, and the science is what it is. You're in space. You're not worried about who's black or white. You're worried about somebody who can help you get back from an extra vehicular whatever they call it, sense, EVAs they call them when they step outside the capsule. But the point is that it's the black and white thing comes in, where how do we handle our trajectory in all of this? And if we're not thinking about that, who is? Because we don't need any more evidence in the world to know that if we're not thinking about this, we will be left behind, right? As a people. Now, the general population, they connect to the mainstream. So they're not being left behind. Although they're being left behind, they're not part of the discussion. They have hitched, their wagons are indelibly linked to the mainstream. They're fine with that, right? The poor white folks in America are fine with what the rich white people are doing, and they will follow them every time. So they are spoken for. The question for us is that, what are we going to do about this? Because we know if we leave it up to them, this transhuman, like I said earlier, the gap is just going to get unbreachable.
All right, Marlin, if you could just hold on to that thought. There's something else I'll come back to you with if we still have time, which is where you said blacks are at the moment more concerned with ending conditions of racism, conditions of classism. But then you also said earlier that transhumanism could be a way of ending racism itself. So perhaps later on, when you come to discuss TNI fully, you could take us through these dynamics of how transhumanism could even end the condition of racism itself. But then I want to take the same question I asked you and pose it to Tsegaye in Ethiopia, East Africa, just to get some reports also from that region. Mr. Tsegaye, what's it like when you talk about the transhumanist scene in Ethiopia and East Africa?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, Marlin was saying that it's not a popular topic. In our case, it's not even a topic. It's something in the shadows. It's in complete oblivion. 8 years ago, we have this initiative called the iCog Makers Initiative. So we work with more than 36 public universities in Ethiopia. And then we work with universities in Nigeria, specifically the University of Lagos, and then universities in Kenya with the Technical University of Nairobi. And then we had this annual conference with students where we address emerging technologies. And under those conversations, we have this section for the philosophy of transhumanism, the technology of transhumanism, and what the future will impose in Africa. And then the surprising thing is that even the academic society in this, I mean, in our perspective, for example, in Ethiopia, they're not aware of this movement, this philosophy, and the underlying radical changes which we are going to face in a very short time. So we got scared, and then we tried to organize these regular conversations. At least we wanted to test the university students because, relatively speaking, we assume that this part of the community will understand the topic, and then they will be interested in the topic. So from those conversations, what I have observed is that, the first thing is we tend to know into what possibilities and what dangers they have. So the conversations in Ethiopia and the community, the tech community in Ethiopia, tend to towards this concept that what are the dangers? How are we going to overcome the inequality problem? Plus, the term trans, by itself, it shows that there will be humans and probably there will be post-humans. So right now, with the human era, we have this I don't know whether I'm going to be controversial here, but let's use the term tyrants. I mean, for Ethiopians and for Africans, we tend to think that the white world, it's a tyrant because, you know, the history, the colonization history, the slavery history, currently the indirect colonization, because, you know, for Ethiopia, we had never been colonized. So we are now suffering the indirect colonization and things like that. So the conversations, when every time they pop up, like I said, they're not strictly academic conversations, but when every time they pop up, the question they pose is that what will happen in the post-human era? Are we going to be dominated by these post-humans? Who will have the access to this kind of enhancements, to this kind of technologies? Will it be open to the rest of the world? Even some of the conversations tend to be like, can we even purchase it? I mean, if we can afford it, can we pay for it? Is it open for the market, or is it going to be just for some elite groups who are going to dictate the fate of the world as an immortal race or something like that? On the plus side, I have seen very young enthusiasts being engaged in this conversation. They want to take it to the grassroots because, you know, when every time we're speaking about movements and philosophies, the best approach is to make it grassroots so that the society can embrace it. And then instead of being a pull, it will be a push. Am I right on the term? I mean, by pull, I mean something outside of Ethiopia, something outside of Africa. But by push, I mean within Africa, within Ethiopia. So these individuals, they try to implement these thoughts here and there. But, you know, it's a little bit challenging when it comes to trickling down the concepts, the philosophies, and the implementation methods within transhumanism. I think you will address these topics because you will be very familiar. For example, for societies like Ethiopia, religious beliefs are very important. How can we find a way where we are going to implement the transhumanist thoughts while we are still okay with the fundamental religious concepts of the nature of humans? What are humans? Another thing I have seen in Ethiopia is that is it too good to be true? Because, you know, we are dealing basic necessities, like we are trying to create a sustainable economics which can provide food, which can provide infrastructure, you know, the basic necessities. So when every time these conversations pop up, the other question is that should we think about this right now while we're dealing with such kind of medieval era problems? It's about priority. The conversations tend towards the priority question. Is it the time for us? But like I said, there are a couple of, I mean, 6 years ago, I published an article on a magazine called Zoma. I'm not sure if they're running now. It's an English magazine. And I addressed this issue, and then I capitalized on the fact that for as long as the dawn of history, days was the great equalizer. Because, you know, this is a problem of inequality. Martin has also addressed a couple of issues like the race issue, things like that. No matter what, days used to be the great equalizer, Chigwa. I mean, after all, we all die, and that's what makes us equal. So in this article, I said, oh, people, now the great equalizer will no longer be the great equalizer. Some people might afford, you know, to pass this. That was a very controversial article. I remember I was labeled as Illuminati, which was a very funny thing for me. But it opened lots and lots of eyes. I received almost 500 emails from university students that wants to know more about this, that wants to actually study, do some research, either a general research or applied research on the topic, so that they can awaken the people. Because when Marlin mentioned the movie Hidden Figures, it was a critical thing for me. Africans, I believe we might have some hidden figures, because the continent, everybody knows that, everybody in this planet knows that there is untapped potential in Africa, be it a natural resource or be it a potential for future markets. Probably we will address it later on if we discuss about technology and inequality, but we know that there is a potential. So at the same time, just with the concept similar to the concept of hidden figures, there is a potential in Africa to untap the human resource that can shape and reshape, mold and remold the concept of transhumanism. So just to answer your question and to conclude my answer, I mean, of course, there are conversations about transhumanism. There are certain groups, I will tell you definitely, not from the mainstream, but from the university community, that understood these concepts and that wants to do something. Recently, I have seen a couple of magazines in Amharic, especially the medical magazine. It's called Medical. It's in Amharic. They published some series about the future of transhumanism, what the world would possibly look like. And then they were welcomed by the public, mostly in a positive way. Even if the public is not aware, even if the economic challenge, the technological challenge are still there, I have witnessed a fertile ground. This is how I'm going to conclude it. There is a fertile ground that wants to engage in these conversations.
Okay, thank you, Hruy, for concluding on that rather encouraging note. I like the phrase you used there, or the description of the fertile ground. It's something that I also thought about some years ago when I did a presentation at the University of Lagos, which you just mentioned, and it was a presentation on transhumanism. And afterwards, in my report, which I wrote to the United States Transhumanist Party, I used that same imagery of fertile ground. We're not there yet, but there is that fertile ground, and then we just need to plant the right seeds.
Yes.
Hopefully, it will grow. Also, let me say, I am the one who will bring more encouraging reports relative to the reports of both of you gentlemen in terms of the scene, the transhumanist scene here in Nigeria and somehow across West Africa. It's a matter of curiosity to me how in recent years transhumanism is really becoming a thing here in Nigeria, especially. Some years ago, I and 5 friends founded the group Enlightenment Transhumanist Forum of Nigeria. With the 6 of us, and we got it registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission of Nigeria. So we exist as a registered group, and we've been able to put together not so impressively, but we've been able to put together about 3 events so far. And over time, in the university where I lecture, somehow, maybe by virtue of my being there, but I noticed over the years, several students have been coming up with topics, project topics around the theme of transhumanism, either for or against. Some write in support of transhumanism, others write against it. But the good thing is people are discussing it. It's better than it being ignored totally. Also, there's at the organizational level, because in academia, I can say from my university, the University of Lagos, and especially the University of Calabar, there's this movement that's emerged called the Conversational School of Philosophy. Although many of the leaders of that academic circle are now in South Africa, lecturing either in the University of Pretoria or in Johannesburg or KwaZulu-Natal. And even there, they continue the society, the works of the society, which I say is Conversational School of Philosophy. And once in a while, the conferences they organize involve transhumanist teams also. We've also had the likes of Dr. Kazim Fayemi from the University of Lagos, who has been writing good articles about transhumanism from an African and especially a Yoruba perspective, which I believe is the ethnic group it comes from. So from the academic side, there is some encouraging developments concerning transhumanism. At the organizational level, I mentioned our Transhumanist Forum, but then there's also this very hardworking and resourceful group called the Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions, in short, TAFTS, TAFFDS. And the group tackles a lot of futurist issues, and they organize several programs ranging from conferences to magazine and journal publications. And there's even a huge summit that the group is currently working on. Transhumanism is also one of the interests of that group. And I tell you, within the space of 4 years, that group, starting from some young Nigerian founders, of whom I'm proud to be friends with, the group has really done a lot for itself, and it still has a lot of potential to do more. I am also the head of African markets for that group, which, like I say, is called TAFT, the Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions. There is also another curious development in recent times that one could see as inspiring the growth of interest in transhumanism among Nigerians, and which is the founding of a particular cryptocurrency called Transhuman Coin. And we have some Nigerian minds behind it. And over time, holders of that coin, one way or the other, get to call themselves transhumanists. It's something that I call on people to look into, because do we see transhumanism as a philosophy which some people have to understand and live by before they could call themselves transhumanists, or by investing in the future of humanity, by investing in perhaps the metaverse using a cryptocurrency called Transhuman Coin, does that also make you a transhumanist? And of which, like I say, several investors, several people who hold the Transhuman Coin, which is positioning itself as, or trying to position itself as one of the major cryptocurrencies that will run in the metaverse. The holders of that coin, several of them today call themselves transhumanists, and there are many of such holders here in Nigeria. So on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, you come across a lot of Nigerians who also proudly call themselves transhumanists, either from the academic, philosophical approach, or from the organizational approach, or from the practice of holding a coin, a cryptocurrency, which is positioning itself to be a key player in the metaverse, and also positioning itself to be a channel through which people can invest in longevity technology, in life extension, and in many human enhancement technologies. And as such, those people see themselves or become called transhumanists. Like I said, there are many Nigerians who have come on board that movement. So here in Nigeria, from different approaches, we are seeing more and more people calling themselves transhumanists. We also have those who are interested in the movement to oppose it. All right. So some write-ups we've seen so far are written from the perspective of opposition. But like I say, it's better when you have the supporters and the detractors, because it keeps the conversation going. And to me, this is a conversation whose time has come. It's no longer ignored. Yeah, we still have a lot of people out there who haven't even heard about it. But within a circle of academia, within a circle of people who are into NGOs, within a circle of people who organize events, and people who are also into cryptocurrency, there's that awareness of transhumanism among Nigerians. And then further afield into West Africa, I have a friend, his name is Toba. I find it hard pronouncing his name, but he's from Togo, and he represents the Association of French Transhumanists within French West Africa. And he has a report of a conference that was held sometime last year within Francophone African academia, and it's dwelt on the subject of transhumanism also. So we're not there yet, but it's not really a ground zero kind of thing. It's not really a totally ignored or unknown of subject here in Nigeria and a little bit into West Africa. So, and I also agree that if the fertile ground is there, all we need to do is to plant the right seeds. When we come to other parts of this our discussion, perhaps we'll also look at what those right seeds could be. To me, it could even be arguing that the use of tools, if we go back in history, back to the Olduvai Globe, back to the East African Rift Valley, history tells us that Homo sapiens started using hand axe or started using tools here in Africa. And the tools will always evolve. And as our tools evolve, so also do we. So Africans should not be scared of using modern tools, because we've always used tools and we shouldn't expect those tools to remain the way they were in the past. All right, so these are the new tools we have now, and we should be flexible enough or dynamic enough to come on board the use of new tools that are available. So that's my own report about transhumanism here in Nigeria and a little bit into West Africa. Yeah, but I think one thing we want to establish through our discussion in this episode is if it is possible to have an African version of transhumanism, what should it look like? And at this point, I want to take the question back to my panelists again. Starting from you, Marlin, what should an African transhumanism look like? Please unmute yourself, unmute yourself.
Here we go. Sorry about that. Yeah. Well, let's open it up, because I think we all have some input on that, and we've kind of given a sense of what we're talking about, what the industry is, what it looks like, how we are or aren't involved. From my perspective, I see it as in terms of our focus on transhumanism should be on what's real, and what's real and how it can benefit the goal of increasing our human competitiveness, because fundamentally it comes down to our human competitiveness. People always use China as an example of a miracle that happened, and the Chinese government, they're they've got this really strict structure, and Chinese government is the Chinese people, right? And it always comes down to you can never get away from the body politic. We, the people. So what African transhumanism should look like it should be an intense focus on our people, right? On culling the herd, looking for our best and brightest, with the proclivities first and foremost. When you start doing your triage, the first question what's the low-hanging fruit? The people who enjoy spatial recognition exercises, people who enjoy computation exercises, people who have photographic memories. There's just a lot of work that we can be focused on, very people orientated, scientifically focused on our people, and so that we can leapfrog a lot of what's going on. And we only can do that with our best and brightest, impacting and mentoring and bringing into the fold, into that kind of thinking, our best and brightest. So yeah, this is a real right now kind of thing.
All right, great. Hruy, Mr. Tsegaye, same question to you. What should an African transhumanism look like?
Definitely, it should look like African. I mean, by this I mean we have to own it, which means we can start with what we can do. We can identify how we can apply this, and above all, we have to own the narrative, because it's all about narratives. I mean, it's about identity. It's about who it is, how it is, and for whom it is. So in this case, an African transhumanism should be owned by Africans. Africans should dictate the narratives. Africans should define the terms, the conditions, and Africans should be the ones that can apply this as well. I mean, a couple of years ago, I wrote an article titled "An Appeal to Transhumanists" on the question of technological inequality.
Yeah.
A couple of years later, I understood that there is no one to appeal to. I mean, we shouldn't appeal to anyone. Okay, we know there is a technological inequality. So our transhumanism should address that inequality. Our transhumanism should identify ways in which we can play with what we have, and then we can grow on that. So it is time for us to answer this question in a way that there is no one to appeal to. An African transhumanism should primarily address Black Africans, Africans everywhere. It could be in US, in Europe, it doesn't matter the location, but we as a people should own this narrative. We should be the ones that dictate the terms. So where we can start, I know it's not going to be an easy answer. I mean, if we have time, maybe I will talk about technology and inequality and leapfrogging. But just to answer this question, there will always be a place to start. And then that place should not be dictated by outsiders. That place should be identified by Africans. It should be identified by us. Once we know that, we can own this thing and we can make it our thing.
All right, thank you. And I like your use of the term there, owning the narrative, because history has shown us that much of what is built by humans, much of what is achieved by humans in terms of society or nations or civilizations all start with some form of storytelling, right? So perhaps the challenge to Africans is to learn how to rewrite the stories and come up with new narratives that make us competitive and also make us to own what we feel should belong to us. But then you also said if there's time, you would like to go into technological leapfrogging, technological inequality, and African transhumanism. And of course, we can spare some time for that because, yeah, the first time I came across your name was in that article about appeal, an appeal to transhumanism on the question of technological inequality in Africa. It's somehow interesting to me to hear you say after some time there's nobody to appeal to anymore. So just talk us through these issues. First of technological inequality, then why there is nobody to appeal to anymore, and why technological leapfrogging should be our own duty to carry out, and how all of these could maybe lay the path towards an African transhumanism. Yeah, but yeah, just as brief as you can summarize all that.
Okay, so by now we all know that transhumanism is fueled by technology, and then the cusp of this will be the singularity, and then many scholars and academics and entrepreneurs have wrote lots and lots about singularity. But what we know is that singularity is a point where revolutionary advances in science and technology happen too rapidly for the human mind to comprehend. And then if that's like the final destination, then the big question will be how to understand and comprehend the starting points, the directions to push, so the destination will be something satisfactory to, at least to us, to Africans. So in this question, I started to communicate with lots and lots of people, and as you said, I wrote that article as well. And then I started to understand that there is a huge technological gap between us, Africa, and the developed world, especially Europe, North America, and Asia. So where to start? I mean, when we talk about this technological inequality, obviously we are going to talk about the education system in Africa, for example. As I've mentioned before, we have an initiative that works with more than 36 public universities in Ethiopia. And then I will just stick with these universities. I mean, I've also seen the condition in Nigeria, in Kenya, and a couple of other African countries, but let me speak about our existing condition. We graduate more than 80,000 engineers annually in Ethiopia because we have this policy, the STEM policy for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the government has a quota, like 65% of the students which join universities annually should be from STEM, and the remaining 35 is for the others, for social science, for the fine arts, and things like that. So the number is huge, like 80,000 engineers every year. We have them. But what's the problem? Let me say something. For example, as an engineer, you need to know how a microcontroller works. And a very common and a very affordable and a very cheap microcontroller, for example, is an Arduino board. But this thing, it still doesn't exist in our laboratories, in the African universities, in the Ethiopian universities. So the students, they just learn the theoretical application of this controller. Same is true for actuators, for example, servo motor. Well, servo motor, I think it's $1 or something like that. You can even afford to buy a container of such kind of motors, such kind of actuators. But the thing is, our universities, they are a little bit outdated when it comes to the curricula, how it is designed. There is little room for practice-based education. So these things, they make us even more backward. They will widen the gap because, I hope that the future lies with the young generation. And the thing that shapes this young generation is our education system. I know there are like some controversies when it comes to the future of education by itself. I mean, education is going to be disturbed. Now we no longer need these mainstream schools, things like that. But still, we need a quality source of knowledge, whether it's an online, a MOOC course, whatever. You don't need to go to the university, I know, but still you need a quality content so you can understand what's happening around the world. At the same time, you need to get your hands dirty. You need to practice whatever it is, whether it is hardware, whether it's software, you need to practice. So when I am talking about technological inequality, the obvious thing is that what type of technology is being applied in the industrialization and in the service sector of the developed world versus Africa. Well, this is the obvious thing, and we know there is a huge gap. So I'm not going to talk about that inequality. I will talk about the underlying factors for that inequality. I mean, our education system needs to be improved. It needs a radical change so we can address this technological inequality, because technological inequality doesn't necessarily mean money, money, money. That is an obvious factor. We know it. We don't have the money, but we need to have the knowledge. I mean, once we have that, we can gap this inequality. On the plus side, for example, Africa's economic awakening is being recognized by everybody in the West. I mean, the numbers, they will even scare you. Starting from 2030 to, I mean, no, not 2030, starting from 2005 to 2015, for 10 years, for a decade, the continent has recorded a steady 6% economic growth. During this time, only China was growing as fast as with this rate. And then recently, I mean, starting from 2020 to 2022, which the world has seen the worst recession, due to the COVID, due to the inflation, lots of factors. But the continent, Africa, has recorded a healthy pace of 3.8 growth on average. So you see, the continent is growing. The continent is transforming. So then the one thing that is missing is a tool that will shape this growth into globally competitive market. And this tool is technology. And then when we talk about the technology, obviously we are going to address the leapfrogging, how we can leapfrog. So, traditionally speaking, in established economic terms, growth is defined with stage. And these stages are like modernization, urbanization, and industrialization. So nations need to pass through these stages, and then they will grow. They will have this sustainable economy, so they can transform the population. But in early 2000, this concept of technology leapfrogging comes to the arena of economic thoughts, and that thinkers starts to suggest that we don't necessarily need to go all through the stages, like the modernization, urbanization, and then industrialization stage. And then they said we can leapfrog. So I think they call it like stage skipping. Stage skipping is when you don't necessarily need to pass through all these stages. The cliche example for that is the application of mobile technologies. It's a cliche, almost everybody knows this as an example for leapfrogging. But at the same time, we need to also address the path creating opportunity. It's also within the leapfrogging concept. I mean, yeah, you can stage skip, but at the same time, you can create a path. So for me personally, I'm more interested on the path creating approach as well when we are talking about leapfrogging. In a very simple example, when you introduce a mobile phone to a jungle where previously there was no landlines, things like that, this is called the stage skipping. But when you introduced payments on that mobile as well, this is called path creating. One good example from Africa is M-Pesa, which is located in Kenya initially. And then now I think for the first time, an African tech company has also expanded outside of Africa. They have a business in Eastern Europe. It's a payment platform. You don't need to use internet. You can use USSD codes, which basically is like your SMS system. And it's a payment method. It has created lots and lots of jobs and economy. So this is one example of path creating. And then what type of technology can we leapfrog in the African arena is going to be the question that I'm going to reflect upon. You obviously, you have two options. I mean, broadly speaking, the first one is the demand-driven leapfrogging, and the second one is the infrastructure-driven leapfrogging. The demand-driven leapfrogging is pretty obvious. As long as there is a demand, you can leapfrog right to that, and you can create a platform, a service, or whatever, and then get into the market right away. But this has a problem because, of course, I'm an ardent proposer of leapfrogging, but there are some problems within the leapfrogging approach. So this is like for the infrastructure-driven approach. One problem will be immaturity. Technological immaturity should be the thing that we should address probably in the next episodes or some later time. When we are talking about leapfrogging and demand-driven leapfrogging, we are just saying that, okay, there is a solution, there is a problem, and then let's create a solution and everybody will be happy. But don't forget, the process matters. In the first place, it's about the discipline. Without the discipline, just introducing these new technologies in a certain ecosystem will not help, or will not solve that thing. I'm sure you are familiar about this story. When trains were invented in the industrial era, they were introduced quickly in Europe, and then they were introduced in Asia, in Siam, just 8 years later. So you can see the gap was just 8 years. But what happened in Siam was that the people were not, the discipline was not there. So because, you know, trains, what's the big thing about trains? Trains introduced how we use time, because in this planet, the one thing that nothing can buy, the currency that matters is time. So trains introduce the concept of time. Before trains, for example, you can go to a workshop, a shoe repair workshop, and you can just give your shoe, and the technician will tell you, come later. He will not say at this day, at this time. You will then visit the shop and ask, is this done? And he will say, oh, I didn't do it. I will do it later on, something like that. But when the train comes, let's say you are a merchant, you know at what time the train starts. So you need to have your product exactly at least 2 or 3 hours before that, so you can go to the train station. At the same time, because of the train, the train introduces markets that starts on queue, on a specific time, which means merchants use trains, will reach on market on time. They will have broad access to consumers and things like that. So this thing in Siam was not observed. What happened in Siam was that the royalties, the families of the kings and the queens, you know, when every time they want to use the train, they will tell to the train station that they are coming, which means the train has to wait for them. So the train starts to be late. Then, because of this, merchants stop using the train, because if you are going to wait for the train, which might go today or which might go depending on the hangover of the royalties, you will lose your market. So they start to use other means of travels. And then the royalties introduced a train tax. And then support, because, you know, when you lose your customers, you need a tax to support that. Because of this train tax, the people starts a revolution and everything was chaotic. So this is true in today's reality as well. When we are talking about leapfrogging, we should not just introduce some new technologies for the sake of it. We should consider the infrastructure drive as well. So African governments, they should consider about the infrastructure driven. They should lay down what we need for this beautiful concept we call technology leapfrogging from the infrastructure side. Then obviously within the infrastructure side, you are going to address the education, and then the common infrastructure like the power supply, network, things like that. I think if we start with this, we can bridge the gap. At the same time, we can address the issue of technological immaturity, which might be one of the reasons why undisciplined community or undisciplined workforce is somehow a danger. Because I'm sure you have heard lots of the time on the news that Ethiopia is registering a remarkable economic growth, and that we are working closely with investors from China mostly. But yeah, it is true. We are registering growth, and it's helping us to achieve technological advancements. But on the other side, when these outsiders came, they came with their technology, they came with their money, and most importantly, they came with the know-how. Unfortunately, they are willing to share their money, they are willing to share their technology, but they are not willing to share the know-how, which means you will always be dependent when it comes to the actual implementation. You can be a user, but you cannot be a developer. So for me, when after 6 years, I said there is no one to appeal to, this was what I was telling, what I was thinking. They can give you the technology, you can use it. They can share their money to some extent. I mean, they don't want you to die because you are still a fertile market destination. They also want you to be alive because you are an exporter of raw materials, not processed materials, just the raw materials. But they will never share the know-how. So this is why I said there is no one to appeal to. For example, I have sent more than 500 letters for philanthropic organizations and NGOs that work with within the education spectrum. To your surprise, none of this has a positive reply when it comes to supporting the tertiary education system, which is like the university education system. But if you ask for money and say you are going to work with children and help them to count numbers or identify letters or something like that, you will find that money. You see the mentality here. Supporting the basic education system is not a danger to anyone. You need somebody to write, you need somebody to count numbers, because after all, you are grooming a future exporter of raw materials. But when you are supporting the tertiary education system, you are creating a competitor. If you remember, Marlin says, it's a human competition, he says, when you ask him what he thinks African transhumanism should be. So this is the thing I observed. They will support as long as it will not make you a competitor. And I will conclude now that, as I've been saying, the gap is there, but the starting point is also there. And for me, the starting point is making a grassroots movement, owning the narrative, and then reforming our education system. I think Marlin will elaborate more what I'm saying when it comes to owning the narratives. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Hruy. While you're speaking, so many questions kept popping in my head. But I think I will rather ask, because several times I saw Marlin himself nodding his head at several junctions of your presentation. So I don't know, Marlin, are there any areas where you want to throw a question to Hruy, just for some clarification? Because I also have some questions too.
Let's just open it up and shoot the questions around. Let's get into it.
Okay. My own question first, if I can just
please
from you. Yeah, I've heard it said several times among even critics of or within development theory, scholars in development theory, and critics of this whole process called technology transfer. Even if we were to leapfrog and we are asked to leapfrog through technology transfer, in which case technologies are shipped from maybe first nations to third world nations, or from developed to developing societies. It's always said that the technologies that will be given to the less advantaged societies are only those technologies that make them to consume
Yes.
more of the products of the advanced societies. But they will never
Yes.
give you the technologies that will help you to produce. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's what you said about that you don't get the tools that will enable you to be maybe a user or a maker or something like that. So, in that
Yeah.
case now, where do we? And since you say we should stop appealing, okay, that there's nobody to appeal to anymore.
Yeah.
All right. So in this case, so we want to counterpose the approach of indigenous innovation, or others would perhaps point to the example of China and label what China did as reverse engineering. In which case, you look at the technology from somewhere, you imitate it, whether shamefully or shamelessly, but you imitate it up until the point where you can, from that approach of imitation, which some people call the best form of flattery, you imitate. Initially, you produce inferior versions of what you're imitating, but so long as you keep at it over time, you start producing more superior quality goods, and even the ones that can compete. So if we are to break free from the model of technological transfer, which is not taking us anywhere, what do we use as the alternative for leapfrogging? Is it indigenous innovation, of which we are maybe starting from the scratch, from the ground up, or we do reverse engineering, where we imitate until we can also get it right and at a competitive level? Which model do you or would you suggest for Africa?
I mean, yeah, we can go with the hybrid. We can still reverse engineer and have some from the ground, from the scratch. But for this thing to work, what I will suggest is we need to capitalize on the absorptive capacity. So the absorptive capacity is like, how do we absorb this new concept, science, technology, and the related issues? If you remember my long example about the train, it was all about the absorptive capacities. How do we absorb this? If we can absorb it in the right way, we can have our indigenous technology, or we can go with the reverse engineering. It doesn't matter as long as the absorptive capacity is there. On top of that, I would like to stress that we need to have this intercontinental trade, intracontinental, not intercontinental, sorry, intracontinental.
Yeah.
An application developer or a hardware manufacturer in Ethiopia, we should have a market in Nigeria, where you are,
Yeah.
or in Kenya, or in South Africa, or in Uganda. An intracontinental trade within Africa will help us to identify what we want in our leapfrogging efforts. Like if we have some indigenous and novel technologies and goods for the market, of course, we can fuel that, we can enhance that, because we have this big market. You know, Africa is a big market.
Yeah.
But to your surprise, the volume of market trade between African countries is very small. We are just exporting and then we are importing. We missed the trade between neighboring countries within the continent. So for me, our economists, they should really understand what absorptive capacities we have. Once they understood this, it will be easy to decide which approach is better. Is it the indigenous approach or the reverse engineering approach? Obviously, nobody wants to reinvent the wheel, you know. It's going to be very expensive and time consuming if you are reinventing the wheel. But if you are working with that wheel, and if you have the discipline and the absorptive capacity is there, reinventing the wheel will not be a bad approach for me.
All right. Okay, Marlin, any question for Hruy?
Well, not really a question, just kind of a riff on what you guys are talking about. I think it's the operational, mechanics of getting there is what you're discussing, really. But that's not gonna.
Yeah.
We're never gonna get there if we depended on that. We'd never get there, because every day that you spend trying to get there, your competitor is always, spending those same days going
One
somewhere
step
else.
ahead.
So we're gonna have to make a strategic and philosophical leap first, and that's gonna come from those hidden figures. It's gonna come from a very unfortunately, it has to be sort of a centralized driven, effort. The way we know things work, it would probably be a very, sort of proprietary start, at least until, some government decides that it's really too big to mess with it, goes in with it and tries to co-opt it or whatever, which is probably will be the next stage of it. So it'll have to start as a private venture.
Yes.
Some aspect of what we're talking about now, it could be, in fact, I'll give you a scenario that's in the next iteration. Our couple, our Black couple who used to work for DARPA, have come up with a system of actually communicating with the body's electrochemical matrix, right? Everybody knows the body's made up of electrical signals that impact, and chemicals. Electrical signals kick off chemical reactions, everything from testosterone and estrogen to insulin and all types of chemical reactions that are in our bodies that help us function. The idea that you can actually communicate with that matrix is revolutionary, right? And it's a real pursuit of the of a DARPA type of organization that stays out front on human development, but it's an absolute revolutionary thing, because now you're talking about being able to not sociologically impact somebody, right, but to genetically impact someone's thinking on an issue, on someone's motivation toward what they're doing. So obviously, those you can see the implications there, and what we're focused on, what we have to be focused on, is the why, right? The ultimate why. We're trying to save humanity, really, right? The Asian, the European, the Caucasian, and the African legs of a three-legged stool, which is what we have, right? And the African leg, and without the African leg, the stool can't stand. It's imbalanced.
Yes.
So it's our responsibility, in a sense, to get this done, to save the world. And that's the premise of the next iteration. But that's also, as I see, the why of why African transhumanism makes sense. The why these hidden figures would step forward and be part of a dynamic, really determined effort to leapfrog into the future, with some very specific efforts, that are happening without permission, without compromise, but in league with and interdependent with, a lot of other efforts like this, because as you and I know, as we all know here at this table, the biohacking world, right? This transhumanism thing, we're talking about people putting, Elon Musk was talking about the neural link, where they're actually surgically doing all these things. There are people right now doing it themselves.
Yeah. So I mean, I I completely agree with you. In fact, you added one spear for my leapfrogging approach. An equal emphasis to the why is necessary as to the how, as you said it. And for me, your program, like the next iteration, it's one of the best examples for me, because owning the narrative will help us to understand the why. You know, if we own the narrative, we understand the why, and these whys will lead us to the how. So thank you for completing the leapfrogging theory for me, Marlin.
All right, great. And I think that's a right way to just segue into bringing Marlin's discussion full circle in telling us about the next iteration. Because from what I get, perhaps what is some of the things missing might be a conceptual revolution, or the need for a vision that will inspire our hidden figures to step forward, and join in this movement to make this technological revolution something of the grassroots of the masses. So please, Marlin, at this point, lay it out for us and for whoever come across this episode. What is the next iteration, and why is it relevant to the narrative of an African transhumanism?
Yeah, well, I think this is how human beings go forward. It's a conceptual thing. We are conceptual people. People are conceptual. If you can think it, you can realize it. A lot of so this is, you see that throughout history of all the great discoveries and people, and who knows where all that comes from and how these individuals get on to the notion of electromagnetic forces surround the earth, and that and from there you end up with GPS, right? Global positioning satellites. That is the human capacity for understanding and innovation. And I think that we as a people, Black people throughout, whose origins, who the Black people who emerged out of Africa and who are there now and who are throughout the diaspora, still have that same capacity, right? And we, in the next iteration, is about sort of unleashing, awakening that capacity, right? Really just positing the simple vision of a future that everybody would probably look at and say, yeah, that's a future I want to see.
This is the next iteration.
The kind of enlightenment-based thinking, right? It's a vision that's in sync with the all of the what we know about the Enlightenment and what was meant by democracy and justice for all and happiness, these terms. This is the next iteration, is our guiding light, not so much a guiding light, like I said, because I think these thoughts are laying dormant in a lot of our population. When you look at what comes out of Hollywood, you understand how those thoughts are being translated by the money that responsible for it in some ways. but the next iteration is an unadulterated vision, a progressive vision of the world we want to see. In our particular case, what I did, understanding that genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nanoprocesses was real, was to start to think about what sort of, it's a forecasting method, right? World building method, a forecasting method called backcasting, right? So I simply said, well, what would be a perfect, sort of, not so much perfect world sounds so crazy, but what would be a world where people felt like, this thing, we got control of this, right? Where everybody felt like we have control of this, right? And I begin to understand it from our perspective, from a Black historical, self-centered historical perspective, that we had to have much more impact over the destinies that we wanted. And that if we could feel like we're taking control of those things, that this world would be a more balanced place, and that then the rough and tumble of competition would be a relatively, sort of balanced affair. And out of that would come the world people want to see. That's all we could hope for, right? So it's very much focused on, the next iteration is very much focused on here is the African vision, and here's how we're going to get there. So we start out with our hidden figures, with these radical technologies, radical technologies. First of all, deciding that they're going to use that knowledge to make the world a better place, understanding it's going to come through their own efforts with their people, then deciding to put boots on the ground, open up a factory, right? We identifying territory. In this scenario with our protagonists, they've identified a strategic location in the southwest side of Nigeria, where it's access to deep water ports and all the things you need to have the kind of strategic mobility. And they start with some very basic things, reproducing some basic but very revolutionary, synthetic oil or synthetic diamonds, right? Because these are the things that are possible now, right? We can produce, okay, we got that kind of technology. So they start simply, but it's all a part of a long-term strategic plan to impact education, right? You're doing the kind of studies that the Chinese did, where they've got the 2,000 smartest people in the world together, or they sent out and identified who they were, who they thought they were, and paid them for their DNA. Right? And then they sequenced all that DNA to find out what patterns are there. And then they started to find those patterns in their own populations. And then they found those people. In other words, they took a very scientific approach to putting the best circumstances together. Yes. And they did that. They just did it. Right? So this is what the next iteration is ultimately about. It's just about, we have the will, we have the knowledge, and we're just going to do it. That is a very revolutionary thing for many of these people. We're going to be that would see this and see themselves in this production, right? They can see themselves like, why haven't I done something like that, right? What's standing in our way? And that's the magic of the media and telling stories, because these stories will reflect the reality, and particularly in our case, the reality of the lives that they live, right? Of the technologies that exist, of the extrapolations that we know about, right? And then adding our own sort of dramatic extrapolations that people could identify with. That will set us on a path, I believe, to a broader understanding of what our goals should be, number one, and how things like the revolutions in biotech, the revolutions in artificial intelligence and its merger with biotech, the revolutions in nanoprocesses, right? Being able to construct anything from the atomic level, that one atom level. These things this threatens and with the hope of opening up all of that knowledge, all of that power that's already there, and then putting people on that path to just making things happen. That's what the next iteration is about, ultimately. And then, you know, there's a lot of exciting drama going on with the title characters, you know, and I purposely constructed it so that it had social relevance, right? They're madly in love. Two Black people madly in love. That is revolutionary today as we stand here in 2022, right? When we see all the counter programming where you see Black people with everybody else but themselves. In the West, at least we see that, right? It's pretty fantastic. In all the media we see, Black folks are positioned as getting along with and love with everybody but themselves. You see them with every other race. A man, Black man with an Asian woman, Black man with a white woman, Black woman with a Black white man, Black man. But you very rarely see two Black people together. This is a reality that we're dealing with. And it's the power of the media, and it's the power, and it's the determination of people with their own agenda, right? That's just the reality. It's not racist, it's not classist, it is what it is, right? And we have our own agendas as well. So us taking media in our own hands, using it for our own purposes, right, is what also what the next iteration is all about.
Right. All right, great. Marlin, there are several places I want to key into your presentation. I don't even know where to start. First, I thank you a lot for bringing it to our consciousness that one fundamental thing needed for this technological revolution is even a conceptual revolution. We need that shift in our mindsets. We need that shift even in our cultural institutions. And it's something that I have also given much thought to. It's something that over time has led me into even what I intend to talk about in picking up from your presentation about those impediments, right? Those cultural impediments that are militating against the cultural revolution that is needed for the African mind to have that scientific and that technological and that visionary or even that liberal thinking that all go into what will bring about this plausible projection of a winning and a competitive African future. So as such, I want to go straight into it to present what I feel are those impediments against the cultural movement, the Enlightenment type cultural movement that we need here in Africa or among Africans as basis or as stepping stones towards the technological revolution, the scientific revolution, and eventually the industrial transhumanist revolution that would put Africa on a more advantageous and profitable path. So to do this, I'll be relying heavily on an African philosopher who passed recently of great renown, known as Kwasi Wiredu. He's from Ghana, but he lectured in many universities in the West, and over time he also channeled his energies into developing what an African philosophy should look like. Now, according to Kwasi Wiredu, there are what he calls three evils that we could see as militating against the African mindset, or militating against the conceptual revolution that is needed among Africans, which ordinarily should help that transition of Africans into a more modern, more scientific, and more technologically driven approach to life, to the world, and to the human condition. Okay, so these three evils, according to Kwasi Wiredu, are authoritarianism, supernaturalism, and then anachronism. And I will take them one after the other and see how we can link them to problem of lack of progressive thinking or a stagnation in our cultural dynamics. Now, the first one being authoritarianism. This we could see as that tendency of many Africans till this day, till this 21st century, to want to hang on to one form of authority or the other in knowledge production or in even conceiving of the world or in building of society or in developing values. All right. And when we talk about such authorities, we mean either traditions or religions, or even some of the imported religions into Africa. I'm talking about the Church of Christianity, or talking about the Islamic religion. All right, so one way or the other, the African is this, many Africans are still of this kind of mindset that you don't think freely, or you're not permitted to do free thinking or liberal thinking. So there has to be, we have to do this because this is how this authority says it should be done. Or we have to do that because this is how this tradition has laid it down for it to be done. And for Africa to have an African enlightenment, the way Europe and much of the Western world had centuries ago, liberal thinking, free thinking, the way Europeans did when they threw away the shackles, or where they freed themselves from the shackles of the Middle Ages, the shackles of theology, the shackles of church, the shackles of state, as being sources of knowledge or sources of value. That is what Africans also have to do. We need that liberalism. We need that ability to engage in free thinking. And with that free thinking, we can come up with concepts. We can come up with new ideas. We can come up with an untethered, unfettered way of thinking about the world, thinking about the human condition, and thinking about ways to improve the human condition. So first and foremost, authoritarianism as one of those impediments, cultural impediments to the African mind, is something that needs to be really tackled and necessarily overcome. Then secondly, supernaturalism. And I know many Africans would have issues with even an attempt to challenge supernaturalism. But it is the case that, or I would rather argue the case, supernaturalism hasn't really been of much help to Africans, or even if it has been of help to Africans in time past, its relevance shouldn't really count that much anymore when we talk about Africans in the contemporary 21st century. And by this, you look at the works of someone like John Mbiti, who claimed that African is notoriously religious. The African is religious in everything he does. He's religious in how he eats, religious in how he sleeps, religious in how he dances, religious in everything he does. And as such, the African worldview is characterized by a recourse to the supernatural, right? The African approach to values, the African approach to even his agriculture, to maybe his productivity, the African approach to even how society came about or how society is to be advanced. All of these try to seek their sources or their direction from the supernatural. And again, we see that the problem with this supernaturalism is it tends to cause a forfeiture of interest or engagement with the natural world, right? Among societies in Europe, among societies of the past, we see that it got to a point where there was this awareness that we need to also engage with the natural world, thinking always in terms of the supernatural and feeling like the natural world is just an ephemeral place where nothing important lies, and there's no need or there is no necessity to engage the natural world, never brought about much development. It was until there was a shift in mindset towards focusing on the natural world, trying to understand the constitution of the natural world, the elements of the natural world. And that is what gave way to much growth in scientific thinking, or the scientific revolution itself. Because by trying to understand nature and by using the approach of observation and experiment and tests and all that, and measurement and all that goes into the scientific method, that is what you need to grow in science. And afterwards, what follows from that, the application of that knowledge, is what gives you technology. But by abandoning the natural world, engaging the natural world with our senses or with our rational faculties, you don't get to accrue any knowledge in terms of science. And without knowledge in terms of science accrued, you don't get to do any technology. So the African overindulgence with supernaturalism is one of those cultural impediments, as I see, against the growth of scientific thinking in Africa, and consequently against the growth of technological applications and inventions in Africa. Then the third cultural impediment, which I mentioned and which I will still briefly explain, is anachronism. And this one is all about that African tendency to see the best times as lying in the past. For many Africans, the golden age is in the past. The best values, the best things that ever happened, the best events, the best models we could follow, the best examples all lie in the past. And as such, we find ourselves with these vestiges of past traditions, which no longer have much relevance to the contemporary world, still influencing, still dominating African thinking. Again, several Africans, or even people in the West, have this guilt of thinking of Africa as a people or as a land frozen in the past. So when you ask some Africans who want to romanticize Africa, what is Africa? They always point you to a time, whether imagined or real, but in the African past. And to them, that is what Africa is. Not an Africa that is fluid, not an Africa that is dynamic, but an Africa that existed in the past. And even if we want to develop today, we should look for how to go to that past, that imagined past. Okay, so, and first of all, it's not even possible to reverse to that African past. And then secondly, there is no fixed African past, as much as I am always ready to contend. There are many Africas, all right? There may be some part of Africa that we have been stuck, in time, which refuse to move with the times. But then you go to many urban centers of Africa today, what you see is an Africa on the move. And that is the move we need to encourage, not a narrative that situates Africa in the past or the best of Africa in the past, but a narrative that tries to break Africa free from the shackles of the past and encourages futuristic thinking. Because anachronism, or pastism, as some people may call it, is definitely an enemy to futurism or to futuristic thinking, which many Africans lack. Mbiti even made to say that Africans have only, in the African conception of time, we only have the past and the present. That there is no such thing as a future in the African concept of time. And to me, that was a dangerous philosophy to promote. Because if you say Africans only have past and present and there's no conception of the future, you are indirectly discouraging Africans from even thinking futuristically, because to them, or if they believe you, that is not an African thing to do. All right, but I am glad some people challenge such notions by saying the fact that Africans practice divination, even as part of tradition, was a clue that Africans also thought about the future. And that should tell us that within African thinking, even within our local traditions, even within our mythologies, and within our spirituality, whatever it is, there was also some space for the future. And all we need to do now is to rebuild some of those, our old stories, some of those best resources from the past, and use them in line with science and technology and reason and creative thinking towards creating or towards building a new vision for the African future. Again, I wouldn't want to be misunderstood on this. There is, and as I always like to cite, this mythological bird in Akan folklore, which even some Africans in the diaspora have really picked up. It's called the Sankofa bird, which means go back and fetch it. And the bird is depicted as flying forward, but with his head turned looking backwards. And for some people who use that bird as a symbol of an African Renaissance, what it means is we could take the best from our past and integrate them into the modern tools we have of science and technology and reason and creative thinking into moving forward into an authentic and a unique and a winning African future. So to me, these three cultural impediments of anachronism, authoritarianism, supernaturalism, if we could pursue an African enlightenment and eventually overcome them through such, or by use of such instruments as science and technology and reason and liberalism and free thinking and progressive thinking, we would experience our own unique African enlightenment, which is necessary as a platform or a ground to bring about our own African scientific revolution, our own technological revolution, our own industrial revolution, and importantly, our own conceptual revolution that will put us on a competitive path within transhumanist civilization. So that's my own submission with regards to culture and a conceptual revolution and why this is needed for an African transhumanism. Okay, so I don't know if anybody want to react to that or if it makes any sense at all.
Okay, so let me be the first one. An interesting explanation. Yeah, I agree with all the points you mentioned. But I think even with these problems, they just need a little bit reshaping so that we can turn these problems into opportunities. Especially, I mean, with what Marlin is doing with the next iteration, we can create such kind of free thinkers and we can, reshape the mentality. But when it comes to the supernatural concept, it can be used for the good. I mean, obviously, it is true that it will create the greatest bioconservatism approach from lots of Africa, because, the more supernatural you are, the more you tend to see the body as an untouchable work of some higher power. Whatever religion you follow will be the one that has authority to work on this body. So I understand your concern that bioconservatism will be one of the main challenges from Africa. But on the other hand, if you see it, these kind of concepts, like humans are not just biological beings, but they have some kind of nature, innate nature that can transcend this biological form, is an old notion, an old concept in Africa, especially in most of Western and some Eastern Africans. There is this notion called the ancestral spirit. I'm sure you have heard it. And these ancestral spirits unlike the ghost in the West, it's not demonic or other form of entity. If it is labeled as ancestral spirit, then it is mostly labeled as an omniscient, immortal, and godlike version of human. This is a genuine African concept. Even if it is embedded in the supernaturalism, it is a genuine African concept. Humans that have a supernatural, omniscient, and godlike feature. So with people like Marlin, who are working on the why and the narrative, I believe that we can reshape these supernatural concepts into more rational concepts. And then all we need to do is implant the ideology that these supernatural concepts can one day be a natural concept. One day they can be something that we can achieve. You know, there is this old saying, like which is like some ununderstandable and complicated science is always considered as magic. But when the moment you understand it, it stops becoming magic. The same is true for this African supernatural mentality. When you understand how to control, for example, let's say electricity, you can be like Thor or a god of thunder or something like that. So you become science, not magic. I think Marlin can also reflect on this. We can use this next iteration tool to create this rational thinking humans, but who can do some supernatural things. What do you think?
No,
Marlin?
you know, the next iteration purposely eschews anything supernatural, right? Everything is science based. So,
yes.
So our world is say at this stage 30, let's say 40 years in front of where we're at right now. So if we take, for instance, if we take what Elon Musk is working on, the neural link, what do we think that technology, that concept is going to look like in 30, 40 years, right? How much more advanced is it going to be? Closer to what we have, the bio patch, where it actually just it reads those and it can control that matrix? Why not, right? I mean, if you look at the whole concept behind the neural link, right? That's it. That's the logical, extension of where it's going. So when we talk about the next iteration, we talking about what they're doing, who they are. We're not going to be talking about anything in terms of supernatural. We're going to be talking about everything that's science fact. And then
but Marlin, let me stop you. I was saying you can blend the story. Like, I mean, these things were perceived as a supernatural abilities.
Oh yeah. No, there's no question.
Yeah,
that's
was what I was saying.
Yeah. There's no question. That's how people are going to understand it. But the social context, once the story will be told, will bring it down to things that people can understand. For instance, athletes who are now being, getting, instead of steroids, who are now getting genetic modifications that increase their testosterone flow, that increase their eye-hand coordination by just there's a it's called there's a
gene crisping.
No, I forgot. It's anyway. The bottom line is that there's a gap, a minuscule amount of time, a nanosecond gap between what we see and our reaction to it. But there's a chromosome that'll help bridge that gap in terms of the connection, making the connection faster, right? The electricity coming to your body. There's a chromosome that helps to move that faster. So we can actually talk about that reality in the context of what people understand. Athleticism, steroids, getting fit, being, better than the next guy. So that's going to take care of itself. But I guess for me, what I wanted to get back to really, because the project, as innocent as it sounds, because it sounds like entertainment, it is entertainment, but the next iteration runs into similar problems. Authoritarianism, this lack of rational thinking and wanting to, not so much the rational thinking, but wanting to do the work about what our future should look like, right? And I think we should, and actually I was gonna ask each one of you guys, I didn't want to put you on the spot, and I don't want to do it now, but think about that. You know, if we had what the next iteration proposes, what are we doing with it? What are you, in your mind? What would you be like, really, like, what would be the flagship achievement that you would point to after you've had this power for a minute? So, but the point is that, yeah, so these people are really, it's really about, what are the forces that stand in the way of free thinking in Africa, on the ground, in Ethiopia, in Nigeria, in South Africa?
Okay, is that a question for me or
for both of you?
It's a question for every black man, I think.
Every black person. But let me also see if I agree with Hruy on one aspect, which is the supernatural concepts are still concepts that could be reworked, and then when they are transformed into technological abilities, we could keep the words used for those concepts, but no longer see them as supernatural. They're just like
well, that's a nice connection, though.
Yeah,
that's a nice connection.
Yeah, they are
supernatural to what's technologically possible. I like that.
Yeah, like you gave the example of Thor. We see across the Western world so many figures in Western mythology over time have been translated into figures in virtual reality, figures in video games.
Yes.
Right? You mentioned Thor. Over time, we see animation series.
He had to go back to 2040.
I think, no, not me. Huh?
Yeah, I think he froze.
Yeah, he's going back to 2040, and I will give him the injection,
right.
which will make him functional in your time. So, Marlin, in the meanwhile, what I was trying to say, just like Hugo says, that your next iteration program, you can show us that what we used to think that they're supernatural are in fact achievable through science and rational thinking.
Right.
Which means, we Africans, we like heroes, we like mythological figures. And the thing is that, in fact, I mean, if you raise somebody who died 500 years ago, and if you let him wander in our streets, he will consider that he's living among the gods, because now we are talking on our phones. For example, you and I, we are miles and miles away. There is an ocean between you and me. And for an African, this is a supernatural thing for the uneducated African. But we can form this mindset that whatever we think is a supernatural thing can actually be done through science and technology.
Yes. That's a
Plus,
it's a brilliant connection too. It's a brilliant connection.
Plus, I mean, you can blend some African mythologies and some African traditional stories into your science fraction, because in that way, we Africans, we can align, we can understand, and we can feel the characters in your stories. Because if you tell us something we know from our tradition, the more our ears will be open for the story flow. Yeah. But when you do that, you can clearly identify what is supernatural, what is a misunderstanding, and how we can achieve it. For example, you asked me, what type of future do I want to see? It's a scary question, by the way. I mean, what type of future do we really need to see? I mean, obviously, our civilization is not healthy. I believe that. I don't want it to be perfect because it's naive to expect it to be perfect. But at least we want it to be healthy. And then what we are doing right now is somehow the child of this dying civilization, by the way. You know that.
Hmm.
I used to be a critic of transhumanism. Even in the book, I criticized a lot. And I said one of the urging motivations for transhumanists is the hatred for the current world and the love for the unknown. The unknown in our case is the future.
Mm-hmm.
But we shouldn't hate the existing world. We shouldn't hate what we are now. We shouldn't hate our humanity. Like I said, it is not healthy. But we what do you think? I mean, when you ask me what type of future you would like to see, what do you think? I mean, like I said, all we're doing right now is the child of this dying civilization. Do you think a dying civilization can give a birth to an immortal civilization?
Well, the question of immortality is one that I don't think as a human being I could actually answer. But the question of what I feel that our human trajectory represents is, continuity and flexibility and adaptability, and that we are a species that has been improving year after year. The totality of our experience in any given snapshot can look pretty chaotic, but the sort of the zoom out picture, the 1,000-mile picture, shows a ongoing civilization that is now considering planetary exploration. So this is something that I think we should be absolutely have as our kind of guiding light, our guiding principle, right? So, and we as Black people at this stage of our existence and development have to find a way to get back to that, because we know that we were there, and we're as the first peoples, we were the first ones to communicate with the stars and communicate with what is inevitably going to turn out to be other smart, intelligent life out there, and that we've been in contact with them. They've been in contact with us, put it that way. And that we, and that our work in mathematics, the rudimentaries of mathematics, geometry, and all that was part of that same continuum. And then we need to get back to that. Our path has been interrupted for whatever reason. It's an interesting conversation to figure out why Black folks ended up as sort of the riding shotgun with this with this white guy who's just fearless, and who, just to keep up with him, we're right there with him. We keep up with him. We're his right-hand man, but we're not out front. We won't take the lead. That's interesting conversation, and who knows? In the scheme of things, maybe, who knows, right? Maybe that's what he's here for, right?
Yeah.
He's here to be the tip of the spear. I don't know.
Yes.
But this seems to be an issue that is consistent in terms of our recent ancient history. He's coming back. He lost his case. He's coming back, right? Would you find that also fascinating?
Yes, exactly.
Is there our destiny?
I am writing
with this guy.
Yes.
Because we got a new driver now. The Asians are coming into this. Do we give up on the guy we've been riding with, or hitch a ride with these cats, or what are we looking at?
For us, I mean, it's better to see which of the drivers will be the winner. I mean, we shouldn't choose sides right now, because, like you said, the end game should be for us to be the drivers, and for that to happen, we shouldn't mingle with their business. Let one of these drivers become the winner, and then we will deal with whoever is coming. Because you can see this in Ethiopia, for example. We are torn apart between the Western and the Chinese. The investment policy, the governmental policy, everything. They're trying to tear us apart. The white driver, they want us on the backseat of the white car, and the Asian drivers, they also want us on the backseat of the Asian car. But now it looks like most African nations now they're siding with unlike the African Americans in the US, most African nations are siding with this new driver, the Asian drivers. You can see it in everything, in the news, in the global news, in the political news. It looks like we are choosing the new driver. But like you said, when is the time to see the black driver? When is that happening? And as for your question, like in the past, we used to be in the front and now we're not. And this is a fascinating question. Yeah, it is true. It is true. What happened? Like you said, our trajectory was interrupted for many reasons, and there is no need to lament on that. But can we get back on the right trajectory? And from my side, I'm writing this young adult novel called Butterflies in Space. It's about Ethiopian kids who wandered around some ancient sites and then discovered that there is a connection between these ancient sites and space travel. And then they went to space and they see lots and lots of Ethiopians that looks like them. Even one of the characters, he says, this guy, he looks exactly like my maths teacher. And the point was that back in the days, Ethiopians were capable of interstellar travel. So, like you said, the future of humanity should not be bound to this planet. We should expand beyond. It is true. And then the question will be, what will be the place for the Africans? Is it going to be the backseat, or are we going to be in the cockpit?
All right. Sorry, guys. I lost connection.
Right.
But
No.
luckily we're going to be editing, so I believe Marlin will
Yeah,
get
yeah.
that part out. Okay.
By the way, Marlin was saying, is he back in 2014? Look for him.
I went as far back as 1998. Yeah, but I did my time travel back again, and I'm back in 2022. Okay, so if I pick what you were saying just now, right, Hruy, we're talking about if Africans are going to be at the back seats in this new the future we're talking about, if we're going to be at the back seat. And I think that should bring us to like the concluding remarks for this discussion, where initially I was of the argument that Africans should fight for representation in the future. But in one of my exchanges with Marlin, he corrected that and said what Africans should seek is engagement. Yes, engagement. So I think that should bring our discussion full circle on this episode. The notion of African transhumanism and the need for world engagement. What is that, and why do we need it, and how can we get it? Starting with you, Marlin.
Well, I think I possibly Hruy, although Hruy out front were in his neck of the woods. We have been participating in some of the international groups, kind of keeping our ear to the ground on what they're talking about, what they're doing, how serious they're taking themselves. We've participated in a lot of those conferences. In Nigeria, you guys been out front and inviting some of the big players to Nigeria to give conversation, to be part of the conversation. Now, what's realistic, and that's what brought me to transhumanism, was my own internal conversation about what's realistic. I had, a very early on opportunity to get myself involved in a lot of theoretical and administrative type advocacy for improvement of the conditions of people who are ass out. I just, and I threw away that, I let that go because I said, and I felt very passionate about being an activist, being somebody who's putting things into motion. My career in entertainment industry has been all about putting those ideas into motion. And the images and stories from the African diaspora are probably our most potent weapon we have, and most important tool that we have to communicate ideas, but to more importantly, posit a vision, that resonates with people, a vision that reflects on and springboards off of our collective historical experiences, right? And that means the complete historical experience. We have been at the seat, in the right-hand seat of the most far-reaching and advanced innovation on the planet. That's a reality. So we, at this stage of the game, have to operationalize those experiences. And that's just going to be a revolution in thinking. I mean, there are people out there right now who could be part of setting up this factory in Malaysia state in the southwest part of Nigeria, right? There are people right now who could be part of creating nano factories in collusion with money and corporate and government interests, if in fact we had that in Africa. And all it takes is a thought. And all it takes is one of our colleagues who's been coming to our events or sitting with us in class, who's now next to a guy who's the minister of research in one of the big African countries or small African countries, who has some IMF money or whatever, and starts to make something happen. This is all it really takes. It's about the idea. It's about how close we are to our own redemption, right? We keep thinking of it in terms of how we have to relate to one of these big dogs. Now is the time with this technology out there is how we have to relate to ourselves, and right, addressing issues of authoritarianism, addressing issues of not wanting to take responsibility for our own future, leaving it in the hands of the spiritual. That's what it comes down to. So we are on the precipice of some big things. And what we're doing here is just, in the scheme of things, it's as important as coming up with, that new electromagnetic manipulation that'll help us to communicate telepathically seamlessly. This kind of conversation, this kind of effort, this kind of awakening is what makes next step in the process more, manageable, more identifiable, right? People can put their finger on it. And I think we're close to that. And this is why I was excited about what we're doing right now, because let's just make it real for folks, right? Let's make it real for folks.
Right. Thank you so much, Marlin. And over to you, Hruy. Same question. African transhumanism, and the need for world engagement.
Yeah, so I mean, the world, sometimes it's the paradox is very funny. For example, if you see, black is cool, by the way, you know that. Like, even in the West, in Asia, wherever you go, black is cool. Everybody wants to be black despite all these problems. So now, for engagement, let us make this thing cool. Let us make this thing cool. Okay. And then for me, especially because I work in the technology company, I believe that we can make it cool with narratives like the next iteration, and at the same time we can make it cool with startups, tech startups that capitalize these emerging technologies. And then let's make it cool. So instead of me using Facebook or some platform that's developed and created in the Western world, let me utilize an African platform. Let me talk with another African brother or another African sister, and then we can see how we can grow. This thing can be real. Like Martin says, it might be challenging to become, what does he say? Yeah, an administrative activist. Of course, it is challenging. So we can start with what we can do. We can make this movement cool. We can also show them that it can be done with small steps, like a startup that works in, let's say, medical
waste management.
Waste
management or medical application. Waste management using fungi or something.
Exactly, yes, like that. So these are like practical engagements of the African transhumanism, and I think it's even a good place to start. We can make this thing cool.
Okay, right. Yeah.
I've been thinking about I started thinking about I just saw a process where they use human excrement as a source for creating energy, bioenergy source.
Yes. This is a common thing in Ethiopia, by the way. It's now becoming almost a mainstream in most rural parts. They use this kind of excrements, human and animal, and they extract methane gas.
Interesting. So in other words, translating unique African problems into opportunities for unique African solutions. And capping it up with African stories, which the world needs to hear, and then telling transhumanism from the perspective of the new African story.
That's right.
So I think we put it that way, and the rest of the world will only be too eager to engage with the transhumanism that will be coming out uniquely from African peoples and their experiences, their expressions, and their daily endeavors to overcome their struggles. And that reminds me, before we go, Marlin, you said earlier that transhumanism could also end the condition of racism. So if you could just quickly elucidate on that. Perhaps that could be for another discussion, but
I don't know if I use the word end racism, but my approach to racism in my later years in life has always been about focusing on what we can do for ourselves, and that has to do. Yes, we can improve our condition is kind of a broad, vague kind of proposition, but very simply, my model has always been about creating an infrastructure of self-sufficiency that's rooted in the economy of our existence and gives us the capacity to ascribe value to our own ideas, our own goods, and our own services. And the business of images and stories is a perfect example of economy of our own existence. The reflection on our human conditions, whether it be comedic, dramatic, mysterious, or documentary, is a compelling human endeavor. We spend a lot of time on TV, a lot of time. That's a whole industry we can own and wouldn't have to sell to anybody else but ourselves, right? That's an opportunity that's on the table. So, so when I talk about
just one more bonus question, and I'm asking this for the sake of perhaps an audience that may have expected this question to come up. And is transhumanism not expected to take us all to a post-racial era?
No.
I mean, you look at Star Trek. You look at that.
There will never be a post-racial era. There will always be interest groups, and they'll be broken down by their capacities. And what we're trying to do is increase our capacity to be a player on the world stage, to balance out that three-legged stool, because there's three big teams. There's Africans, there's Asians, and there's Caucasians. And
these three races will continue to exist even in the transhuman era.
Absolutely. And they will continue to break down roughly into those conglomerations. That's how it's going to be in the foreseeable future. And then and with that kind of balance, we'll grow. Who knows what could grow out of that? But that's certainly a recipe for a kind of a concurrent progress that the world could feel good about.
All right. Tsegaye, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I also share Marlin's view, because most of the time for me, racism is not about color; it's about status. Because I can tell you for sure, from it, as an Ethiopian, in the time of my fathers, we have this derogatory terms for the white people. We had never been colonized. Plus, like 15, 16 years ago, the world was not as as the gap was not as huge as it is right now. So the status was somehow, similar somehow. I'm not saying it was exact, but for most Ethiopians back there, even the term, we have this term called French for white, which is a derogatory term. We don't see them as superiors. And it was not about, like I said, color. Another example was that back there were lots and lots of Arabs in Ethiopia. And most of these Arabs, they were like coolie. This term coolie means laborer. So for me, transhumanism, whether enhancing our biological condition and turning into violet, red, or whatever color we like, it will not solve the problem of the racism. But if it can address the problem of the status and how we can enhance the condition and gap the inequality, I think it can address the racism issue. Because after all, if I am a billionaire, trust me, no matter what my color, you will love me. This is the truth in this planet. Huh?
All right, that's great. And
Yeah.
I once heard, I read in one, there's a book written by a Nigerian author, which I read some years ago, Sefiata, where she says it is the economy that makes a culture attractive. All right, so no matter what your culture is, if your economy is good enough, people will be attracted to it.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've done a lot, and we've gone full circle and then full circle again, and it's time to bring the show to a close. So let's just take a 1 minute outro from the two of you gentlemen, and then I call it a wrap. So Marlin.
Yes, outro. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for the time and the questions and the inquiry. It's much needed. And hopefully this is the first of many.
Yeah, we hope so. All right, Tsegaye.
Well, it's a good start. I like how we started. I hope we'll have this as frequent as possible. And in addition to that, let's see what we can contribute to the next iteration as well. So I'm going to appeal. Now there is somebody to appeal to, by the way. I'm appealing to Marlin.
Marlin.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
maybe you please slip some of our ideas in one of the episodes.
Absolutely.
And thank you very much.
All right. Thank you both, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you both on the show. And for as many that will form our audience, feel free to send in your questions through whatever link you find. And then hopefully we'll see you again at the next episode of H+ goes Africa. Africa goes H+.